Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is, oftentimes people take this intersection of, well, my environment isn't great, and I'm probably not great, once again, because the environment isn't great, and it's also too late, so I just have one path that I can go down, and that path is whatever they've put themselves into, the silo. The truth, though, is that there's a lot of different paths. And so when we ask this question, well, what roles are out there, right? I've actually talked to a number of people, and what I found is there's probably 5 to 10 that exist in sort of common form, and even more than that. So when we talk about the technical track, these are basically all the different positions that are out there today. Now I know, being a freelancer means that you're going to have to get your own clients, you're going to have some level of expertise, you're going to have to be savvy when it comes to a business. And then when I say consultant, I don't mean business consultant, I mean, an actual engineering consultant. You can also be an individual contributor inside of an organization, large or small, startup or big company. And then there's this concept of a technical team lead. And when we say technical team lead, this is sort of the precursor to something like an architect, right? You might be 2-3 years in, demonstrated some leadership capabilities, but you're also capable of building things on your own. And then, of course, there's architect. And this is a very elusive term because people are like, do I need to know everything? Do I have to code the whole system? What does it take, right? And most architects that I've worked with or I've talked to don't know everything. They know how to understand a system and they know how to think very high level. And a lot of them do write code, but they're not building the whole thing, right? What they're doing is they're explaining to people how to build the whole thing. It's very much like somebody who builds a house, right? They don't lay every brick out. They're like, hey, you over there, you need to lay all these bricks, right? Here are the blueprints to do it. So this is actually a very interesting role that I think a lot of people don't realize they have the potential to grow into. And yes, you have to have some level of technical knowledge over time, but it's not the type of role that you have to feel like, oh, in 15, 20 years, I could be an architect. I've met people that get these sorts of roles within 5 to 10 years. It's really about them understanding how to think very systematically. Now, if you're on the design side, right, things like being a creative director, once again, it's a combination role of being somebody who's a little bit of a manager, but once again, giving direction for the overall brand and the design of the product that's being built. And then when I say manager, not all managers are created equal, right? And what that means is that not every single manager is going to be someone who spends all their time with people. Especially in smaller organizations, you will have to start by doing some technical work and sort of figuring out that balance, right? If that is a desire for you, you can actually negotiate that up front. Now, these last two, I think, people often forget. And I think they're actually really critical. And the reason I say they forget this is because, they just get so drawn into industry, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what happens is they don't realize that there is a need. So when I say teacher, I'm obviously saying, yes, you could be a high school teacher, you could be a middle school teacher, but there is a real need now at that level for computer scientists. The other is also adult education, right? There's all these people who want to get retrained. There are companies that are doing training programs. Even Femgineer, we are always looking for great instructors. So think about how if you want to get a little bit more human interaction, if the issue is I don't want to spend 8 to 10 hours a day coding, then being a teacher can be great. The other is a professor. I just spoke to my professor. I just met with her a couple weeks ago back at Duke. And one of the reasons that she said she became a professor is, one, she loved the flexibility. She has twins. And the other is because she gets to interact with students, but she still gets to do engineering work, right? She still gets to do the research behind education and how to teach people better when it comes to engineering. So that's an option. You don't have to think of it as being a professor means all you do is research. You can also do the other side, which is coming up with better curriculum. And the other is, there's such a lack of women professors out there, and a lot of universities today want that, right? They want to attract more women. And I am certainly a testament to the fact that if I didn't have my professor, who was a woman in my entry-level class, I probably wouldn't have been as attracted to it. She was definitely very patient, she cared, and was inspiring, and that's probably why I stuck with it through all the 4 years. So think about these roles, right? You don't have to make a drastic switch today, but I want you to realize that there are more opportunities. Now, the other thing is, just because I've mentioned, these 5 to 10 roles doesn't mean that that's all there is, right? The market is definitely changing, and a lot of times people do hybrid things. I've come across people who write code during the day, they teach at night, or they're an architect somewhere and then they're working on a side project on their own, right? So there's certainly a lot of blurring going on. Now, when you are trying to figure out which of these roles might make sense, in a year or 2 years or whatever your time frame is, the one thing that I encourage people to do is to look at all the projects that they've done in the past. Because when you're in that mindset of, I don't really like this technical role, or I don't know if staying technical is for me, some of that can be an environmental factor. So what I recommend is people write down every single project that they've ever worked on, from now all the way back until whether they were in college or high school, or whenever they were first drawn to engineering or some technical work, and to really get at the essence of why it is they were interested in that type of work, right? And so for me, it was partly being a TA in undergrad, so that's why I do a lot of teaching now. And the other was, obviously building products at startups, so I have that entrepreneurial spirit. So you have to kind of take stock and figure out what might make sense for you, and then find the role that fits those particular projects that you liked and the characteristics of those projects. Now, a lot of times people will come and say, I don't have a lot of projects under my belt. I just got started, or I'm new to this field and I need to figure out what it is that I want to work on. So yeah, using a platform like GitHub is great, right? Because you can showcase your work. But once again, you kind of have this chicken and egg problem. You're like, okay, but now I need to get work in order to actually showcase it. So I came across this startup called Code Montage. And they're a little bit like Change. Not quite the same, but what they do is they actually have coding projects that are open source, that are cause-based. And so if you want to find a side project, you're not sure you can come up with some idea of your own, you can actually sign up and make very, very small contributions. And this is a great way to build up your portfolio. Now, I know after saying this, you're going to be like, yeah, right, like, who's going to give me a job if I contribute to an open source project? And, what's the point? Or I don't have a lot of time. I don't know. I don't see the value. So I'm sure that, you're not going to believe me, which is why I'm bringing up this gal, Courtney. So I met Courtney in New York when I was doing a forum out there earlier this month. And Courtney told me a very interesting story. Courtney told me the story of how she was an English and anthropology major, and she loves to instruct people on dance. But she was drawn to technology, and so she started to teach herself how to code, and then she started to do some projects on Code Montage. And then basically, she noticed that there was an opening at this company called Dev Bootcamp and applied. And Courtney's pitch to Dev Bootcamp was, well, if you need to know that I can code, you can check out Code Montage. And I do a lot of instruction as in my dance troupe. So this became a selling point for Courtney, right? So it was very interesting to see how she could take two separate passions and actually combine that, similar to what Jasmine's done, and actually make a career out of it, right? So think about this. This is how Courtney has decided to not only transition into being technical, but has also stayed technical. Now, the other problem I know is when I tell you these things like, oh, you should do some side projects, you should get out there, you should talk, and et cetera, right? Then it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And so I'm not encouraging you to do all of these things overnight, but instead pick a couple things that are of interest to you and focus on some key areas. Now, you may wonder okay, what does that mean, right? So if you like something like social change, maybe you want to explore some opportunities there. If you like things like security, scalability, you might want to think about that. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times that expertise is actually what keeps you motivated and staying technical, right? So think about, is there a particular area? But I know the converse can also happen, where you want to continue to stay general, right? You might be like, oh, I just love to be a Jill of all trades and I want to do a lot of different things. And that's okay too, right? You don't have to make the decision today. But keep taking stock of what it is that you are particularly interested in and how you can sort of carve out whatever expertise you want to portray, right? Think about Courtney. She used her expertise of being a dance troupe instructor along with a self-taught developer and combined the two to now instruct people at a boot camp. So let's talk about the management track next, because a lot of times people have this issue where they're like, well, I just don't know, I kind of want to work with more people, or I want to get more involved in business, and I feel like I don't want to write code all day. So the couple things that I will mention is, once again, if you're a software architect or you are a technical lead, you're still going to be interacting with a lot of people and oftentimes with multiple business units. It's not just about your own team. But when we talk about the management track, it doesn't mean that you can't stay somewhat technical, but there are a few other things to consider. So the first thing is you're going to be doing things like keeping track of budgets and maintaining resources or controlling resources, right? So these are some things that if you don't know how, you need to learn, right? So it's thinking a little bit more broader than just managing people. There are going to be other business functions that you have to perform. The second is you'll be pulled in a number of directions. I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean by that is one day you'll be coaching an employee, the next day you will be talking to marketing department, the next day you might be doing some project management work, right? So there's obviously a lot of different things you're going to be doing as a manager. Now, despite which path you decide to take, right, I leave it up to you to kind of dig into this in greater detail. Wherever you're at, if your goal is to advance within that particular organization, then I would say to understand that organization's structure. So Karen and I had this conversation a year ago where she told me that at her previous company, Adobe, in order for somebody to advance, it wasn't just good enough for them to be really great at their job, right, and deliver results. They actually had to get some input from their peers. They had to be able to show that they could coach and lead other people and contribute to the other person's career growth as well. So you have to figure out within your organization what it's going to be. Now, a lot of times people come out and they're like, well, I'm this really tiny startup, I don't think anybody here gets promoted, or there's not a ladder and it's pretty flat. And that's okay, right? But figure out what it is. And also, just because there isn't a process today doesn't mean that you can't bring it up, right? So think about maybe if it is important to you to understand where the company is headed and how you can continue to evolve with it, you have that sort of conversation, right? Because chances are you're not the only one who's wondering what's going on and how things are going to progress a year or two from now. The other is that the company's needs are obviously going to change, and it's very likely that you might also grow into a role that can support some of those needs. This is a great thing about growth organizations, kind of like change, where you can come in, you might start off as an engineer, but as the company starts to expand, they make some good demands on your skills and actually help elevate your career, your technical abilities as well. Now, I'll say these things and people will say, well, I was on the lookout, but then they gave that promotion to so-and-so. Or, I thought I mentioned that I was interested, but I just, didn't get the opportunity, right? So the issue with these sorts of roles, whether it's a technical leadership role or whether it's a management role, is a lot of times they're given to people who not only ask, but have demonstrated some level of success. But the other is that they not only asked, but sometimes timing is involved. So if you feel like I just didn't time it correctly or I wasn't clear, right, don't feel like it's the end of the world, right? Chances are the organization may grow and you have another opportunity, or if it's really important to you, then you might want to think about looking elsewhere, right, finding other opportunities, especially if it's the kind of thing where there's only one team lead for every 5 or 10 engineers.